Alrighty, everybody, let's talk about perhaps the the follow-up with the most pressure in the history of television. No, I'm just kidding. Kind of. I don't know. But let's talk about The Last of Us Season 2, Episode 3. So if you haven't seen The Last of Us Season 2, Episode 3, this is going to be a full spoiler discussion. So if you haven't seen it, no worries. Just make sure to save this segment, save the podcast, or skip ahead as you desire, and make sure to come back once you have seen it, and you can join in on the discussion in the comments down below if you have seen it, or if you just simply don't care about the spoilers, then welcome, and let's talk about episode number 3. So like I said, no big secret, no big surprise. I think that a lot of people were incredibly curious, myself included, to see how this show was going to follow up on last episode. Obviously, last episode killed off one of its main characters, Joel Miller, and now the question becomes, just like it was, I'm sure, when people were playing the games, because again, I haven't played the game, so I don't know. I generally, just for some context, knew that, okay, this is going to set up Ellie on a revenge path, very similar to Abby, and they're going to kind of be on opposing paths. And that's basically all I knew, post Joel's death. And so really the question for me is, how are they going to go about that, and what are they going to do to keep the story alive? Because look, I mean, I've heard the discourse. I'm sure that there are people who decided not to watch episode 3 based on what happened in episode 2. I'm sure that, I'm sure that just because, I mean, coming off of such a crazy episode, that there are just people who are like, I can't watch this new episode. I need some time, even if they are intending to come back to the show. And I think there are people who were so attached to Joel as a character that they're not going to come back. And that is the risk you run of making a bold decision like that. But it worked for the games, and we'll see how it works for the television show. So again, I'm just very curious to see, what is the direction, where are we going, and how are we going to get there? And again, I suspect I knew that we were heading towards a direct confrontation, obviously, between Ellie and Abby. And now it just is a matter of, okay, how are we going to execute that? So let's dive into episode 3 here, because truly, in terms of specifics, I had no idea what to expect. Like, how do you come back from, last week? So starting out here in this episode, just the gut punches continue when Tommy shows up to Joel's body and he whispers, "Give Sarah my love," alluding to episode 1 of this entire season, where Joel's actual daughter dies. Just a brutal, horrifying, traumatizing. You forget that this show and episode 3 with Frank and forget the other guy's name, but just the way that this show is able to traumatize you emotionally and really take you on those rides is unbelievable. It's crazy. And speaking of that, Bella Ramsey, I say this a couple times in my notes throughout this episode, but give her all the awards, because earlier on in the episode, when she awakens after the death of Joel for the first time from the hospital, and she just starts screaming, I felt that so viscerally. And it's hard to explain, but you just the screams, he's not even saying anything, but they elicit such a raw reaction from the audience member, myself. And I think that is just so incredibly powerful. Interestingly, though, what I was not expecting, because I thought we were going to sit in this moment for a little while longer, but we jumped 3 months. And I was interested in this choice. I don't know, because we're just never going to see a show or see a version of the show where they really do sit in this and it's just a linear timeline of you have to progress with the characters healing from this and whatnot. But we jump 3 months later, and Ellie is, very clearly Ellie is still so damaged and so hurt by all of this, and who can blame her, right? Seeing her father figure die in front of her, murdered in front of her, right? But it's interesting, because we return to this version of Ellie who's talking to Gail, Catherine O'Hara, and she's like, I'm good, I'm okay, and she's trying to keep it together and really just trying to be that version that people want her to be. And she's talking with Gail, and I think it's Ellie who says, your final moment with someone doesn't define your entire time with them. So that's her trying to cover it up. But then Gail responds, but it often does, right? And there's still a lot left unsaid, and we know that Pedro Pascal is going to come back in season 2 for a lot of flashbacks. He wasn't in this episode. I think that they just needed to give us some time to be with the other characters for a little bit. But I'm sure that we're going to really dive into the fact that because when we start, like, so what's clear to me, because I was a little unclear about this. What's clear to me now, at least from what we've seen in the show, is that Ellie doesn't know anything about what Joel did by killing the Firefly. She's going to know, because Abby's going to tell her. I'm positive of that, and that's going to brew up a whole other batch of trauma drama for her, right? But she doesn't know about that. So she was mad at Joel for another reason entirely, and that's not been revealed yet. So I think that that's going to be a crux of these flashbacks that we head into, because that's what Catherine O'Hara's character Gail brings up to Ellie. She's like, hey, the last time I talked to Joel, I asked, what happened? And Joel said, I saved her. And Ellie's like, I don't know what that means. Maybe she's lying. Maybe she knows. But I think part of the draw and the interest of the rest of the season is going to be how that unfolds. Like, what actually led up to the moment where Ellie and Joel had that falling out on New Year's Eve. So we'll see. We'll see how... we'll see how that unfolds. But again, I think Bella Ramsey, she's doing such a great job of hiding that pain. We know, though, that anger is just bubbling up inside her. I love the moment, though, where we let the barriers come down a little bit, let the walls come down a little bit. Bella Ramsey, so good. Just a little scene where she's with Joel's clothes and she starts breaking down. She's so good in those moments. And also playing that defiance as well and that anger, which is obviously going to play a big part in the season moving forward here. So, and also now it's so clear, right? The parallels are so clear that Ellie is now at this point of rage, that exactly that same point of rage that Abby was at the beginning of the season, and their paths are really going to crisscross here. Then we cut to people in the forest who are talking about a prophet who was dead for 10 years. Kind of random. Are we going to get more backstory about them later? I honestly have no idea. They do come back later, obviously, or rather their bodies come back later. But I was a little confused about this. I thought this was going to be a whole subplot, and I'm sure it will be at some point, where they explain. I'm assuming WLF, the Western Liberation Front, is that what they're called? The group that Abby's a part of, I guess. I'm sure that we'll get an explanation as to why they presumably killed all these people, but as of right now, I have no idea. So just kind of a random subplot here, which is interesting. Then we cut to this council scene, and a lot of really interesting dynamics going on here, because one guy gets up and he's like, "Look, we gotta forgive. Like, we gotta have mercy." And on a human level, at a place where for me as an example, like, I'm not going through that kind of trauma. I mean, yes, it's the human ideal. We want forgiveness, grace, mercy, right? We want to really think about, live up to those ideals of being better people. But you know what Ellie's going through, and you can see her fury is beginning to grow. And then interestingly, Seth, right? The guy who made that really, offensive remark to Ellie and Dina in episode 1, is suddenly on their side in a different way. Obviously, he apologized in the last episode, but he's on their side in the sense that, he's like, we got to make them pay. It's retribution, and they're going to come back for us. And so then I thought that was an interesting twist for that character, who also has a moment where he helps them out later on in the episode as well. And then Ellie gives her speech, and she, she wrote it down. She's trying to stay composed, and she's doing a good job. And she thinks it's about justice, and it's hard. And we're not going to go into the philosophy of any of this. It really, what I'm here to do is just to sit in these emotions and really applaud the creators of the show for allowing us to sit in these emotions, because it's hard, right? Is it justice? Tit for tat? Is it revenge? Yes. Is it some kind of justice? Yes. Is it the right kind of justice? I don't think so. But what do you do? Because also the people, I think Seth says something like, well, we got to make them pay, because if we don't make them pay, they're going to come back. And it's true, right? I mean, because on the one hand, if they don't go after them, there's the sense in which they are going to come back, or they're going to attack them again in some sense, even though, they don't know that it was just a vendetta against Joel. They don't know that, right? But on the other hand, if you do go after them, it's not as simple, right? As just, okay, we're one for one, we're done. It's going to start a war, right? And so there's just so many complicating things that are going on here, that I think we're really going to dig into for the rest of the season. It's crazy to me, though, that the council is just so casually voting on sending an execution party to Seattle like it's nothing, like they're just voting on some kind of inane bill or something. I think that's, I don't know, part of the situation, right? It's so desensitized to all these kinds of things, but they reject it. Ellie's on her own. We knew that she was going to go regardless, but Dina decides to join her on the adventure. And I suppose that in terms of, I was thinking about playing the game, I'm sure that was the the big thing of, okay, so now Joel's gone, Joel and Ellie are not together anymore, and it's going to be Dina and Ellie for the most part. So I kind of figured that was going to happen as well. And I think that, we see later in the tent that Dina's like, oh, I that didn't mean anything, and Ellie's like, yeah, it didn't mean anything. But we see those feelings beginning to burgeon, and I'm sure that that's going to really play itself out into season 2 and probably season 3. Season 3 is going to be the second half of The Last of Us Part 2, so we'll see what happens. They were actually, it took me a second because they were talking on the horse on the way, and Dina was like, okay, who was the first person you killed? And I was like, whoa, that's a crazy question. And Ellie was like, oh, the first one is to I'm not going to get into that, but the second one she talked about. And I was like, oh, are we ever going to learn about that first one? And I thought about it and I was like, oh, no, that was Storm Reed's character, I think, right? I think she killed Storm Reed's character in that flashback episode in season 1. That was a great episode. That was a crazy episode, where she was at the ball. But yeah, I think that's what it was referring to. You can let me know in the comments down below. But yeah, they're in their tent, they're sharing their feelings, and then they run across the people earlier from the Prophet people who got killed, and probably by Abby's crew. And then we cut to Seattle. We see a tank. We see lots of military people showing up, and that's the setup, I guess. So there's going to be some confrontation. I mean, there's two young women heading into a place where there's going to be, looks like, hundreds of soldiers, hundreds of military or WLF soldiers or whatever's going on there. Who knows how they're going to go up against that. And honestly, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen for the rest of the show. Directionally, like I said, we have an idea of what's going to happen. It's Ellie going after Abby and trying to get her own revenge, and we'll see what happens there. But I think for the most part, especially as sort of I'm not going to say a letdown episode after the craziness that was last week, but just sort of a follow-up, right? I think that this was solid, and I'm still interested to see where we go from here. I'm still very, I'm missing Pedro Pascal, and I think that I'll be glad to see him in flashbacks, because I really do think we do need to resolve and understand where these characters were coming from entering the season, right? Why they were so mad at each other. And I think that that's definitely something that we'll need to resolve as well. But guys, that is season 2, episode 3. The show must go on. Even if Joel's dead, the show must go on, and we're heading into a very interesting confrontation, I'm sure, in the coming weeks ahead. So guys, those are my thoughts on season 2, episode 3 of The Last of Us. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this episode, because I'd be very interested to see, did you guys, are you guys still on board, or after last week, after last week's episode, are you like, nope, kind of over it? Let me know in the comments down below.